Okay, class lecture number 19. I hope you enjoyed last lecture. Let me give you a little refresher on what we're doing here and what we have been doing. Last time we were talking about World War I, and we're going to finish that up very shortly. Here's a matter of fact. We started with Verdun, and we talked about the Battle of the Campaign at the Somme, mentioned to you about the American Expeditionary Force, John J. Pershing, Blackjack Pershing, and we also talked about Nikolai II, the Russian Tsar, with his 5 children, his wife, Alexandria, and the Russian Revolution that took place here, and the Tsar is going to be deposed. We'll talk more about him later in this class period, and the individual that will eventually come to power here in Russia was a communist. He was a person by the name of Nikolai Lenin. You probably know that. And we also mentioned his sidekick, so to speak. At first they were enemies, but later they became close friends here. His name was Leon Trotsky. More on Leon Trotsky very shortly here. All right, and we also mentioned about the Easter Rebellion. It took place in 1916, where Ireland was trying to gain its independence. They had been promised independence or self-rule from Great Britain, and then it was taken away from them, largely due to the war. So that Easter Rebellion, it was not successful here. And eventually Ireland will gain its independence, at least the southern part, the Republic of Ireland. I like that a lot better than the northern part, but the northern part's okay too, you know. And in many ways they're quite different from each other. All right, we also mentioned that Woodrow Wilson. Woodrow Wilson had his 14 points. The one I particularly want you to remember is point number 14, to establish a League of Nations, an international peacekeeping organization here. We're not quite through with that. All right, and I think I also mentioned to you about the war coming to a close on the 11th hour, the 11th day of the 11th month in 1918 here, and the Treaty of Versailles. We end that war with Germany, and we also mentioned that about the Paris Peace Conference here. It took place at the Palace at Versailles and the Hall of Mirrors, as a matter of fact. You should recognize the Big Four associated with this. All righty, so I think in the closing parts of the class period, I mentioned to you about the problems that Woodrow Wilson, the President of the United States, had with the Senate, and particularly that with the chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, Henry Cabot Lodge here. And as a result of that, the United States, we did not ratify the League of Nations. We did not become a part of the League of Nations. We never became part of the League of Nations. And likewise here, we did not ratify the Treaty of Versailles. We're still at war with Germany. Well, we will end that war with Germany here. We'll finally come to an agreement and agree to the Treaty of Versailles. All right, so anyway, let's go to a couple treaties here, because the Treaty of Versailles deals almost exclusively with Germany. So we're going to have to sign some treaties, and I'm not saying we, but in Europe, some treaties will have to be consummated with some of the other nations here. So let's address that of Austria first. All right, so here we go. If I can get this position properly here, and this treaty that will end this war with Austria officially is known as the Treaty of Saint-Germain, and what Austria actually agrees to do here, they will recognize, remember we had this huge Austro-Hungarian empire, and they will recognize the sovereignty of new nations here, such as Czechoslovakia, not known as Czechoslovakia today, Yugoslavia, we don't have Yugoslavia today. It's a number of countries here, to include Serbia, Slovenia, and so forth with that. All right here. And we also had another treaty. This treaty, which is called the Treaty of Neuilly. Treaty of Neuilly. Now, Neuilly will end the Treaty of Neuilly will end the war with Bulgaria, and Bulgaria will give up most of its possessions that it gained in the Balkans War. Will give that up to Romania. All right, we also had the Ottoman Empire. So let's address the Ottoman Empire, and it is the sick man of Europe, and it's going to lose much of its possessions. Its European possessions will mostly go to Greece. Think about this now. Palestine, Mesopotamia, that's where Iran is today, will be taken over controlled by Great Britain. If you go to those areas today, you may wonder, say, well, why do we have such excellent football players? And when I say football, I'm talking about the real football, soccer. Why do we have such excellent soccer players that come from Palestine and from Iran? And they really do. They really have some very, very excellent football players, soccer players there. And it's because Great Britain had it as a possession and introduced that game to that area. France will gain control from the Ottoman Empire of Syria, and from the Ottoman Empire, Italy will gain control of Anatolia. Anatolia is in the northern parts of Turkey today. But in 1922, a Turk by the name of Mustafa Kemal, sometimes is known as Mustafa Kemal Pasha Ataturk. It's kind of confusing there because actually if you look at the names there like Mustafa or Pasha, it translates roughly to that of Germany. And for that then the Turks will actually regain that control of Anatolia from Italy. This article here deals with that, the battle that made Kemal Ataturk. And I think I might have, I know I don't have a likeness of him. I had it out during the last, I had the photograph of him out during the last lecture, and I've since put that up here, so I apologize for that. All right, so anyway here, and so like I said, I'm going to rehash this, for the United States, we did not join the League of Nations, and it would take us a while before we would actually consummate the Treaty of Versailles to end the war. And that, my friends, is going to end World War I. So that is behind us. And we're going to move into a different chapter here. If you're following in your textbook, I'm on about page 858. If you do have a textbook, and I always hope that you do, follow along. And let me get my sheets organized here. My slides. This is kind of a challenge to do so. But following the war, and I'm still having a problem with this, following the war, we're going to see decades of disillusionment and desperation to take place in Europe. 4 dictatorships will emerge. I'll just tell you, those dictatorships right now, as I am struggling with this problem here, but these dictatorships will be in Italy and in Russia and in Germany and in Spain here. But as a result of World War I, we're going to see 4 empires to fall, and you can figure those out here: the Ottoman Empire, the German Empire, the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and the Russian Empire. But let's direct our attention over here to Russia, and we're going to spend quite a bit of time with this, as a matter of fact, for the next few minutes. Next part of the class period anyway. And after the Russian Revolution took place in October and November of 1917, the Bolsheviks, of course, were under Lenin. Lenin was assisted by his Commissar of War, and that Commissar of War was Leon Trotsky. Tell you a little bit about Leon Trotsky. He was, at first, as I mentioned earlier, he was not a friend of Lenin. He was in a gulag up in Siberia, had his wife with, had a couple of children. I think I told you about that in an earlier time. He was from a rather prosperous Ukrainian family. He was Jewish, but he was not a practicing Jew. And in fact, his proper name was Lev Bronstein. I did not write that down for you, but that's okay with that. All right, so anyway, the Russian Civil War will break out 1918 to 1920, Russian Civil War. If you've ever watched the movie Dr. Zhivago or read the book, I find very few people have read the book, that's what it deals with, the Russian Civil War, 1918, 1920, and I didn't write this down for you folks, but other nations, including the United States, Great Britain, France, and Japan, actually sent troops into Russian-occupied territory, not to fight the side that Lenin was on, but just more or less to have a military presence there. They're really more allied, however, with the opposite side. We have with the Lenin side here, Lenin and Trotsky. These are the Bolsheviks, of course. They controlled the Red Army. The Red Army had a force of about 5 million. And opposing them, and in support of the Tsar, the return of the Tsar to power, were the Mensheviks, supporters of the Tsar, and this was called the White Army. So we have 2 sides to this. We have the Red Army, and we have the White Army. And the war took place pretty much throughout the western parts of Russia itself. Give a little, take a little. Sometimes the White Army would win, sometimes the Red Army would win, and eventually the Red Army will win out with that. During this war, let's see if I wrote these figures out for you. During the war, we're going to have at least 1 million deaths. 1 million other individuals will die of diseases or die of starvation. It was a tough period of time during this Russian Civil War. It's estimated that somewhere between 100,000, 300,000 public executions took place. This was mostly from the Red Army side, executing just the peasants or people from that supported the White Army with that. All right, so the Red Army will win this. There's some setbacks, however, for Lenin and Trotsky. They have to give up large tracts of area that had previously been under Russian control. Will go to Finland, or will go to Poland, places such as that. So it was not a 100% victory with that, but they will gain power with that. It was during this time that the Tsar, Nicholas II, and his family were sent to, and I told you this at an earlier time, they were sent to the eastern parts of the Ural Mountains to a place which was called Ekaterinburg. I think it is known as Sverdlovsk today, and that's where they were literally kept under house arrest for a period of time. Note the date here, folks. It's 16th of July, 1918, and for the royal family, they were summoned out. They were in this private home where they were kept literally under house arrest, and they were summoned to go out into the central area of the house and prepare for a portrait, and have a photographer to come in and have their portrait to be made. And so the royal family went out, the Romanov family went out, they positioned themselves to have the photograph to be taken, but instead of a photographer coming in, it was an execution squad that actually entered into the room. And when they did so, they just fired point-blank range right into the family itself. And the family, the Romanovs, the way the story goes anyway, had actually sewn jewels, the treasures of jewels, had sewn them between the pleats, between the layers of the fabric there of their outfits that they were wearing, and that there were so many shots that were fired that it literally was just ricocheting off those jewels, the royal jewels, that was embedded within the clothing there. And so all the members were killed there. The family dog was killed. The doctor, 3 attendants were likewise killed. And for the royal family, the Romanovs, their bodies, at least for 5 of them anyway, their bodies were dumped into a mine shaft, and then 2 I think were buried elsewhere. And it was not until like the 1970s or something like that that the bodies were actually discovered. And when the bodies were discovered, they were and the United States volunteered for this, to actually do DNA testing, and they determined that it indeed was the Nikolai II and his family there. And the bodies were later transported back to St. Petersburg. And you remember a place I told you about earlier, which was called Peter and Paul Fortress, and that's where they were taken there to the cathedral there at Peter and Paul Fortress, and that's where they were laid to rest, and that's where they are today, by the way. I have an article over here that deals with this. I'll just show it to you like this, and this will be on display for you good folks here, showing you Nikolai II here. You can see the skeletonized remains down at the bottom right here, of some of the members there. Some people claim that one of the girls actually was able to escape, but I think that's been proven to be largely a hoax with that. Okay, so let's go back to our camera. We'll continue on with this. And by the way, you can actually go over to Peter and Paul Fortress and go inside that cathedral. Expect a huge crowd there. I forget what it is. It's about 50, 60 rubles, something on that order, to be able to get admission to that. Okay, so here we go here, folks. So the Bolsheviks are going to bring forth a reign of terror that's going to be even greater than that of the French Revolution. And it's just so many people killed. And I'm going to give you some numbers here that you're just honestly not going to believe as we go through the remainder of the lecture here. Okay, so anyway, let's see, where am I here? I want to go a little bit further with that here, because I mentioned that about the reign of terror. The secret police would shoot many individuals, spy on individuals there at that time. There was an attempt on the life of Lenin, an assassination attempt there. Lenin was shot in the neck, and the bullet was never removed from his neck, so he'll live with that bullet for the remainder of his life. But following that, the enemies of the state were just tracked down in large numbers. And I'll use this phrase again later in the class period. Just real or imagined enemies of the communism will be literally tracked down. And all of this would continue until there was literally no further resistance. And once there was no further resistance, then, of course, the reign of terror began to relax just a little bit. Okay, but during the same period of time, Russia's going to experience just an economic collapse. And in 1920, Russia's industrial output was only 13% of what it was in 1913. So it's just it's a miserable period of time here under this Leninism or communism that we're experiencing here. So as a result of this, and I want you just to imagine this, as a result of this, Lenin halted the payment of wages. So you think about this. You've got a job. You have a job and you work, I guess, because you're a capitalist, you want to have income. But what if suddenly somebody halted the payment of wages? You'll be given only the basic necessities of life. Private trade is not allowed. So in other words, if you're a farmer and you grow grain and you have excess grain, you cannot trade it. You cannot sell that. You're not going to get paid for this. You're just working for free. You're working for the government. How would you like that? I don't think you would like that at all. So it just wasn't working. So what Lenin had to do in 1921, he introduced a new program which is called his NEP, the New Economic Policy here, which would allow a return to private manufacturing, allow a return to the payment of wages here. You could sell your excessive grain, your excessive merchandise that you would produce that would not be taken by the state anyway. And so it was, this goes so very contrary to communism and socialism, because this actually borders upon, capitalism itself. And in the words of Lenin, he described this as, well, sometimes we have to take 2 steps backwards to be able to take 1 step forward. Here. So anyway, that's a new economic policy here. Okay, by 1924, in Russia adopted a new constitution. It created the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. This is abbreviated in English as USSR. Now, if we see it in Cyrillic, if you see it in Russia, it is CCCP. Now, CCCP is the same thing in English as USSR. So most of you are probably too young to remember the USSR, the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, but I can remember it very, very well. And if you get a chance to go to any of those communist-controlled areas, such as Bulgaria, Romania, or even Russia itself, in the antique shops, or just in a novelty shop, you can still buy all of this memorabilia that has the inscription CCCP on it. If you go there today to Russia and you try to look for USSR, you're fooling yourself. You're not going to see it because it is all CCCP. Well, enough of that. All right, so let's move on here. So Bolshevism became communism or Leninism, and I'll tell you that Lenin was a subscriber, to Marxism, to the gospel of Marxism, if you wish to use that. But he really just kind of bent the rules to make it just best fit the way that Lenin wanted. Now, Lenin, with most people, was a rather popular individual. He moved the capital from St. Petersburg back to Moscow. He moved it from St. Petersburg back to Moscow. And he lived in the Kremlin himself. You probably heard of the Kremlin. I'll show you in a photograph in just a few minutes here, part of the Kremlin walls in the background anyway. But he lived in just a little 2-room complex, almost in a monk-like existence, hermit-like existence with that. He did not experience the fineries of life, dressed like a peasant. Oh, he dressed like a worker, I would say anyway. But there was nothing fancy about the individual here. He was just a very, very ordinary type individual, but I think he was extremely brilliant. All right, so anyway, let's move on here, folks. And Lenin died in 1924, January 1924. He had a series of a series of strokes. I don't know if that was related to the neck injury or not. And let me just spend a few minutes here talking to you about Nikolai Lenin. And I want to show you a photograph of a statue of Lenin. That's the appearance of him. That's pretty much what the way he looked. 5'5". He's not tall at all. And I took this photograph in some city in Russia. It doesn't even matter which city it is, because every city in Russia that you go through, you'll find these statues of Lenin. So, I mean, even today, Russia is not supposedly communist, but it's not too far away from that. But he's still a very, very popular individual. Statues everywhere of Lenin. All right, and Lenin was never buried. Lenin was never buried. And I want to show you a couple of photographs here. And this is a photograph which is the Historical Museum. This photograph is taken at Red Square. That's in Moscow. You've probably heard of Red Square. If you look to one end of Red Square, and by the way, this is where Russia and the Soviets always had their military parades. They bring their guideline missiles out, or whatever missiles that they had, bring their tanks out, frog missiles, so forth here. And at one end of Red Square, this is where you have the Historical Museum. And if you go to the opposite end of Red Square, this is where you will find St. Basil's Cathedral. Isn't it pretty? It's a beautiful, beautiful place. You have the onion domes that are present there. You can actually go inside of there. It's free of charge to go inside St. Basil's Cathedral. But don't let this external appearance fool you. It's beautiful when you look at it from the photograph, but when you go up close to it, it's all worn and faded and in bad need of repair. So you have the Historical Museum here at one end of Red Square, and then you have St. Basil's Cathedral at the opposite end of the square. Now, if you go into the Red Square, this is where you'll find the tomb, the mausoleum of Lenin. And looking in the background there, that's the Kremlin wall that I was telling you about a few minutes ago. The Kremlin is like like Washington, D.C., or it's like the White House and the Capitol complex there. And if you look right here, this is written in Cyrillic here, L-E-N-I-N, Lenin, and that is a Lenin mausoleum. All right, and you can actually go inside of there. Now, for you to do this, now I'm spending too much time on this, but for you to do this, you have to enter into Red Square, and you go into Red Square right here where my fingertip is, down here, and you go into this side building, go into this enter the side building right there, and that's where all your personal belongings have to be checked. You can carry no cameras in there. There's nothing that can be carried into this complex here, and so you have everything has to be left behind there, any parcels or anything else. And then from there, you'll go over to the side here where my finger is, and it's just like going through security at an airport. You'll be wanded down. If you understand what I'm talking about, anything that you have will be confiscated. So you leave everything over in that office complex I was telling you about a few seconds ago. Then you're screened. You go through the metal detector points there. Get in a long line. You know, when I went through there, you didn't have to wear a mask. You'd have to wear a mask there, I'm sure, today. And then you make your way over here to where the Lenin mausoleum is. Now, you'll go behind. So this photograph was taken out in the Red Square side, but you actually go on the other side of the Lenin's mausoleum, and between there and where the Kremlin walls are. And that's where you'll find the burial sites of all these great Russian leaders here. Leonid Brezhnev, Joseph Stalin, and we'll be talking about in just a few minutes there. Nikita Khrushchev is not buried there. He was considered to be not a very good leader is what I'm trying to say with that. And so he is buried in a kind of nearby private cemetery. You can actually go down there and see Nikita Khrushchev's burial site too. Some of you have no clue what I'm talking about with that. Then continuing the long line, you'll enter into the Lenin mausoleum. And once you enter into the Lenin mausoleum from the rear side, there's no talking whatsoever. There's no laughter. There's no talking. You're moved along very, very quickly. You'll be inside the mausoleum for about 45 seconds at the very most. You have police that are present there. There are military personnel that are present there. And you can actually see the body of Lenin. There he is here in the top photograph. That's exactly the way he looks there. And that's exactly the way he looks today. And he's been there since 1924, folks. So if you figure the dates on that, he's been there for 1924. He's been there for 96 years. That's the position that he is president in. You cannot take photographs of him. I did not take this photograph. This is from an archive somewhere. Every 18 months, his body is taken out. You see in the lower photograph, is preserved in a special type of chemical there that keeps the deterioration from taking place there. And honest to goodness, and there it is 96 years later. Every year, Russia promises, well, we're going to bury the man this year, and then they never do bury him, you know. So I don't know, you know, I wish they'd just put that man to rest. But kind of interesting if you go to Red Square to see all of that. Okay, so let's move on here. Now, most people presumed anyway that Leon Trotsky would be the new leader of the communists, of the Bolsheviks here, and that's what everybody thought, you know. He was Lenin's second-hand man, but this is not just in the plans here. And the person that's going to be chosen as the Secretary General of the Communist Party and the new premier of the Soviet Union is a person by the name of Joseph Yugashvili. Joseph Saakashvili. He's from Georgia, by the way, and I'm not talking about Georgia next to Alabama. He's from Georgia, which is over there in that area of the world. He took the name Joseph Stalin. Not a very tall individual, chain smoker here, liked the women and so forth here. Joseph Stalin, let's see if I can find a likeness here of Joe Stalin. There he is right there. Okay, here. And in fact, I was talking about him in my U.S. history class today, too. Joseph Stalin. All right, so anyway, that's Stalin there. And let's move on with this. We'll continue with this here. And let me get things positioned properly. All right. So Trotsky, by the way, was expelled from the Communist Party in 1927. All right. Many people presumed he would be the new leader, but he is expelled from the Communist Party, went to a couple of countries here, and you never trust the Soviets, you never trust the Russians. They will always get you in the end. And anyway, Trotsky took residence in Mexico City. He had his private home, and it was all guarded. You could not get into the home. He had a personal secretary. I guess she just recorded his writings and that sort of thing. But the Soviets never miss their man. And so the Soviet Union sought out the services of a Soviet agent. The person's name is Ramon Mercader. And on the 21st of August in 1940, Ramon Mercader was pretending to be the boyfriend of the secretary of Leon Trotsky. And somehow he was able to gain entrance into the residence of Leon Trotsky. And I imagine it was the secretary that allowed him to come into the residence. And he was on an assassination mission. And what happened, he went up to where Trotsky was. And do you know, can you imagine what an alpine climbing axe is? An alpine climbing axe, you know, it has it's shaped kind of like a T. It's used to drive in pitons and mountain climbing. And it has a long a spike on the front part of it, and it has like a hammer on the back of it. And what Mercader did, he just walked up behind Trotsky and just skulled him right to the top of the head, if you will, with the alpine climbing axe. And of course, that resulted in a splitting headache for Trotsky and led to his death with that too. Mercader was placed in prison for a period of time, and I think he was released at a later time. All right, and that's what Soviet agents do. That's what Russian agents do. Okay, so anyway, so back we'll go to the camera here with Joseph Stalin. Okay, so Joseph Stalin. Stalin introduced a 5-year plan. Now, this would determine how much industrial output and how much agricultural output would be produced and during a given year. It also would determine the price of goods, the price that you would be paid for your wages here. And it was known as a 5-year plan. And don't discount this. This was different than an NEP that was put out by Lenin. This was a very effective plan, my friends, and we're going to see that the industrial output and agricultural output of Russia will increase by 50%. Now, you may not think that is too great. I think it's remarkable, particularly considering the time that this is taking place. The world is in an international depression. The United States is in a depression. Europe is in a depression. And with Russia, the Soviet Union, they are having a 50% increase in industrial and agricultural output. So the 5-year plan was remarkably successful. Or was it? Well, let's see. And we'll move on. Now, before we get into that, what Stalin introduced was what was called the agricultural collectivization. So what we're going to do here under agricultural collectivization, I'm not going to go back to me, I'll just try to explain it to you. We're going to confiscate small farms. And by confiscating many small farms, we build these huge agricultural areas. If you understand what I'm talking about, we remove control of the small farms and we consolidate all the small farms into this collectivization. We create these huge agricultural areas, so farmers lose their land. In the midst of all of this, to support the industrial output, 20 million people are relocated from the countryside as farmers, and they're brought into the cities to work in the factories. Sounds great. That increases your industrial output many times over, 500% over, if you will. But if you take these 20 million people that were farmers and you take their farms away from them, what happens to the agricultural output? Well, we don't produce as much food as we did before. The industry does very well, but what this leads to in the Soviet Union is the Great Famine. It takes place in 1933, and it's estimated that as many as 3 to 5 million people actually starve to death. Industry's great, we produce some food, but many people are starving here. So we get the Great Famine to take place. Not a good period of time. Okay, so in addition to this, during this period of time under Joseph Stalin, Joseph Yugashvili, 3.6 million Russians are incarcerated. That's 3,600,000 Russians are incarcerated. Many of them are taken to gulags in Siberia where they will just literally waste away. In the meantime, Joseph Stalin doubled the size of the army. Double the size of the army. I didn't put it out here for you folks on this slide. I don't think I did anyway. But the senior officers, and it's about 40,000 senior officers, are just taken out, and just, 10,000 of them are exterminated, and the remainder of them are just placed in prison here. Boy, this is going to be terrible, terrible for the Soviet Union when World War II does break out, because when it breaks out, all their senior officers, all their best officers, they've all been killed or they've all been incarcerated. Okay, so moving on here. By 1936, the USSR, the Soviet Union, established a new constitution. This created a government that consisted of a presidium. Presidium is like close advisors to the Supreme Soviet. You would also have a council of ministers, a two-chamber parliament, and, of course, Stalin as the Supreme Soviet. And if you ever see photographs from this period of time, a little bit after this period of time with Lenin Brezhnev, you'll find the presidium and all this body that I just mentioned right there. They'll all be positioned on top of Lenin's mausoleum. All right. So anyway, and that's amusing with that too. Okay, they developed, like I said, a new constitution. This provided for a Bill of Rights. It gave freedom of speech, a right to peacefully assemble here, the right to worship. But I'll tell you that the Communist Party ignored almost all of that. It gave you retirement, life of leisure, but like I say again, the Communist Party largely just ignored that. Okay, now it's amazing here. In the population of Russia, and Russia had, or I should say Soviet Union had a population of 150 million, there were only 1 million communist members. 1 million communist members. So not everybody in the Soviet Union is communist. All right, moving right along here. In 1939, the communists began what were called show trials. Show trials. Anybody, real or imagined, that was considered to be a threat to the Soviet Union, you were placed on trial, where you would be tortured, publicly tortured. And I'll guarantee you, my friends, you will confess. You will be confessed, and you will be publicly executed, usually with a pistol shot to the head. It's a frightening, frightening thing to have this. If you were even considered to be a Trotskyite, you would be taken out and executed. I can remember going into Lithuania. In Lithuania, went into a facility. It was a prison. It was a tourist place today, anyway. But it was a former prison, and a prison for the, if you will, for the Gestapo and the SS in Vilnius in Lithuania. And later it would be used by the Russians, by the Soviets anyway, to put political prisoners. And you could actually go into the very execution chambers where they would pull the pistol out and shoot these individuals in the head, point blank range. And I am telling you, my friends, I had nightmares about that for weeks on end. I just could not get that thought out of my mind here. Okay, so back we go here. I don't mean to share personal interest stories with you. All right, let's move right along here. And we'll see the great purge to take place, the Great Terror, as it's sometimes referred to as. From 1937 to 1938, 1 million people were killed. 1.5 million Soviets were placed in labor camps. And Stalin had over 9 million people imprisoned, banished, or killed. And the thing about it is, you don't hear anything about that, or we hear very little about it. Now, how many of you individual, how many of you students are familiar with Adolf Hitler, and Adolf Hitler perhaps taking care of 9 to 11 million people of the Jewish faith, the Untermenschen, people of the Jewish faith, and Jews, Poles, Slavs, Gypsies. How many of you have heard of that? Probably everybody that's listening to me right now. But how many of you have heard of Stalin in the Soviet Union eliminating 9 million people? One of those things we just do not hear. Stalin was equally as bad as Adolf Hitler and Benito Mussolini. All right, maybe even worse. I don't know. On the other hand, illiteracy was reduced from 50% to 20%. Sounds good. Higher education was provided for everybody. Socialized medicine was provided for everybody. Sounds great, doesn't it? Kind of sounds like the United States. It really does here. But the thing about it is, you are going to be propagandized. You're going to be brainwashed with this. You're going to have your education controlled. Your professors at universities will lead you in the path, if you will, of Leninism or Marxism, or in the United States will push you into the path of socialism. It happens today here, folks. Be open-minded when you get your college education. Be open-minded. Just like Nietzsche said, develop your own values. Do not be herded along like cattle. Let's move along. I'm tired of talking about that. All right, now in Italy, and most people couldn't believe this. Italy was a modern nation. Now, how could Italy move towards rebellion? Well, let's go back to World War I, for example, here. And in World War I, and Italy didn't enter into the war until 1916. It was almost well over a year after the war actually started. And Italy put into uniform 5.5 million individuals here. 700,000 Italians were killed. And many people felt like that Italy just did not get its right share. After the war was over, the war reparations, many Italians were just deeply distressed with this. Italy, like most other European areas, and including the United States, faced inflation, enormous inflation. There was high prices there. There was unemployment that was present there. Many felt like that Vittorio Orlando had just betrayed Italy. All right, so a new form of government will emerge. I'm going to say a new form of ideology, not government at this time, will emerge, which is known as fascism. Fascism. All right? You do not suppress other groups in fascism. So it's a little bit different than that of socialism, a little bit different than that of communism. All right, so let's move on with this. And the individual so closely associated with fascism in Italy is this individual. You probably have heard the name before. The people refer to him as Il Duce. Il Duce. It means the dictator. The dictator or the party leader. I'll share a couple of things with you here about Benito Mussolini. Here he is here wearing an Italian helmet, by the way. Title of this book is Fascist Italy. When I was in graduate school, I had to read this book, and I'm going to tell you right now, any of you have trouble sleeping? Any of you have insomnia? If you can put your hands on a copy of this book, I'll even loan you my copy, and I guarantee you'll get a good night's sleep. You'll sleep like a newborn baby once you read this book here. It's extremely boring here. But anyway, it was Benito Mussolini. Let's see if I have another photograph of Benito Mussolini. Here he is, right up here. There he is here. He's standing in his, that's the place in which he took residence. It's called the Palazzo Venezia. Plaza Venezia, and it's present just right outside the Roman Forum there. You can see, just throngs of crowds out here that are gathered around him. Here's a photograph. You can imagine this and where he's speaking from. He's here, and let me make sure. Yeah, he's speaking right up here, standing right there, and you can match it up there. There he is right there. And that's his home. I've never been inside of it. I took that photograph, but I've never been inside the home. I don't even know if it is open to the public there. All right, so let's go back to Benito Mussolini. And I didn't finish that section. I just happened to look down and saw something else there about Lenin. I'll go back and get that in just a few minutes here if I can remember to. But Benito Mussolini was a socialist. He was a fascist here. His father named him Benito because his father was an admirer of Benito Juarez. Benito Juarez was a revolutionist down in Mexico, too. And Mussolini's father admired him. He also had a great admiration for Giuseppe Mazzini, a great admiration for Giuseppe Garibaldi that we've talked about at an earlier time. So he was encouraging young Benito here in the ways of fascism and socialism. So Benito Mussolini, by the way, was an educated individual. He was editor of a socialist newspaper, which was called Avante. Later he was educated, or later he was, did I write it down here, folks? I did. He was the editor of another fascist newspaper, which was called Il Popolo d'Italia. I cannot really translate that. I think it's the people of Italy is what I think it means anyway. And but nevertheless, here Benito Mussolini, he was educated. He was Catholic, by the way. Became a elementary school teacher. His mother was an elementary school teacher. How many of you people are going into education? And I always ask that, and if you're in class with me, I'll ask that. And I have a couple of you that are going into education. Some of you will enter into pursue degrees in elementary education. I give you a pat on the back here. I really do. Education is a great way of life. I've never done anything in my life, my friend, except be in a uniform of some type, in Boy Scouts or Cub Scouts, or be in the Army, or teach school. That's all I've ever done. I've never regretted that. I enjoy being an educator, and I encourage all of you to go into education. Really, you'll never be rich, but you'll be comfortable. And it's a rewarding experience. If you're one that is cut out to be an educator. A lot of people are not cut out to be an educator, and and that's sad. That's really sad. They don't devote themselves to their teaching like they should. It's my personal opinion with that anyway. But the point I'm trying to make here, we don't envision, dictators of a country being elementary education teachers. We just don't. But that's what Benito Mussolini was here. He tried to avoid World War I, but was conscripted. He was drafted, served in the trenches for 18 months, was wounded in the posterior, if you understand what I'm talking about with that. But he did survive, and of course now will become the dictator of Italy. Now, what he ended up doing in 1922, he marched 50,000 of his black shirts. I'll show you the slide of this. 50,000, I think there's a photograph in your textbook, of some of those black shirts, and marching into Rome itself. The government capitulated and fled, and the king of Italy, Victor Emmanuel III, invited Mussolini to form his own cabinet, and sure enough he did. So Mussolini, even though we have the king, Victor Emmanuel III, Mussolini is going to be really the true leader, the true dictator, chancellor here of Italy. All right, so anyway, that was Mussolini. Now, for Mussolini and Italy, they advocated several things here. And let's spend just a second on this. Statism. And this is a principle that there is nothing outside the state. The state is everything. There's nothing above the state, outside the state, or against the state. Everything is for the nation. Everything is for the nation. Nationalism, and that was the second principle here. Nationhood is the highest form of society. And the one that's most remarkable is that of militarism. Glorifies war. Strife is the origin of all things. Nations that do not expand will die. War exalts man, and it regenerates sluggishness. In other words, if a nation does not go to war, a nation will digress. Those nations that are aggressive, that are belligerent, those are the nations that are going to be progressive. I don't believe that personally here because I do not believe in war. But anyway, that's the principles there behind fascism and Benito Mussolini. Now, before I forget it, I want to go back to Lenin for just a second. And I want to show you a photograph here of Lenin, and I apologize for slipping over this earlier. But this is a photograph that's in your textbook, and it's showing you Lenin. Lenin is the guy with the short individual with the bald head. And this photo is Photoshop, by the way. It's been blended. It's actually two photos. The person in the white right there is Joseph Stalin. And so the photography expert actually joined those two photos to show that Lenin and Stalin were good friends, and they were really not. Later we would find out that Lenin was quite critical of Stalin here. But when Lenin died, his brain was removed, and his brain was cut into 3,000 small slices and placed in between microscope slides. And those small slices today, are housed in the Department of Psychiatry present in Moscow. To my knowledge, that's where they are anyway, because it is recognized that Lenin was such a brilliant individual. All right, now let's move on for a few minutes here, and I want to cover this for just a second here, and let's go into Germany, because the next lecture that we have, we will spend almost the entire class period talking about an individual by the name of Adolf Hitler. But after the war, Germany, like Italy, had a terrible, terrible time. It was Great Depression there. You can look at some of the photographs in your textbook and see that the money that they had, Deutschmarks were just worthless. You could wallpaper with those. Children would play with the money and just use it as toys. Use it as building blocks to get stacks of money there. So the money was absolutely worthless. And so many socialist groups appeared. One of these socialist groups, which were the Spartacists. Now, Spartacists were communists. They were led by Karl Liebknecht, Rosa Luxemburg. Let's see if I have likenesses of those two individuals here. I thought I did. Here we go. Finally digging around to find them, and there they are right there. That's Rosa Luxemburg here, and over on the other side that's Karl Liebknecht, and they were communists, and they were trying to stage a coup, as a matter of fact, and take over the control of Germany. But we had another group. Let's see if I wrote this out. And another group. Did I write it here? Yeah, here it is. The Spartacists were attempting this uprising, but they were challenged by a group that was anti-communist. And this group, which was known as the Freikorps, they were anti-communist, and they rose up against this rebellion by the communist Spartacists. And quite truthfully, Rosa Luxemburg and Karl Liebknecht were captured, and something happened as they were being marched off to jail. Something happened to them, and they drowned in the Spey River. That's the river that runs right through Berlin. Well, I know what happened. The Freikorps just killed those individuals. All right, now let me kind of close out with this. We had the government that will be established in Germany following the war, World War I I'm talking about. This government was known as the Weimar Republic. Remember to pronounce this with a V. Use your rules here. V-E-I, so we pronounce it as a long I, so Weimar Republic. But the Weimar Republic was doomed from the start. Now, the Weimar Republic meant well. They were working towards democracy. They were in favor of women's suffrage, women's right to vote, but they were doomed from the start. There were too many reactionaries that were against them. And I want you to stop and think about this, and think about this from the German perspective here. From the German eyes, Germany is the greatest country. If you listen to the German national anthem, Deutschland über alles, Deutschland über alles, I could sing it right now, but I'm not going to embarrass myself. Germany overall. Germany overall. Germany is the best country here. Germany has the best army. Germany has the best scientists. Germany has the best doctors. Germany has the best institutions of higher education. Germany has the best philosophers. Germany has the best athletes. Germany has the best institutions. Germany has the best of everything. So how could Germany lose World War I? How could they lose World War I? It's quite easy to answer that. Germany was stabbed in the back. Germany was stabbed in the back by communists and stabbed in the back by people of the Jewish faith. That's not me saying that here, folks, but that's what many, many individuals thought. And what we're going to find here is some of these individuals are going to capitalize on that, and particularly one man in particular, a man who is not even a German. He's a man who is an Austrian. He was born on April the 20th in 1889 in Brno, Austria. Have you figured out who I'm talking about? That man's name is Adolf Hitler. And that was the belief of Adolf Hitler. And the next time we get together here, friends, that's what we're going to be talking about, Adolf Hitler. So get yourself ready and buckle up, because we have got a lot to discuss with Adolf Hitler. More than anything that you ever wanted to know before, I promise you. Okay, thank you very much.